India is a country that occupies the greater part of South Asia. Its capital is New Delhi, built in the 20th century just south of the historic hub of Old Delhi to serve as India's administrative center. Its government is a constitutional republic that represents a highly diverse population consisting of thousands of ethnic groups and likely hundreds of languages. With roughly one-sixth of the world's total population, India is the second most populous country, after China. It is known from archaeological evidence that a highly sophisticated urbanized culture, the Indus civilization, dominated the northwestern part of the subcontinent from about 2600 to 2000 BCE. From that period on, India functioned as a virtually self-contained political and cultural arena, which gave rise to a distinctive tradition that was associated primarily with Hinduism, the roots of which can largely be traced to the Indus civilization. Other religions, notably Buddhism and Jainism, originated in India, though their presence there is now relatively small, and throughout the centuries residents of the subcontinent developed a rich intellectual life in such fields as mathematics, astronomy, architecture, literature, music, and the fine arts. Throughout its history, India was intermittently disturbed by incursions from beyond its northern mountain wall. Especially important was the coming of Islam, brought from the northwest by Arab, Turkish, Persian, and other raiders beginning early in the 8th century CE. Eventually, some of those raiders stayed. By the 13th century much of the subcontinent was under Muslim rule, and the number of Muslims steadily increased. Only after the arrival of the Portuguese navigator Vasco da Gama in 1498 and the subsequent establishment of European maritime supremacy in the region did India become exposed to major external influences arriving by sea, a process that culminated in the decline of the ruling Muslim elite and absorption of the subcontinent within the British Empire. Direct administration by the British, which began in 1858, affected a political and economic unification of the subcontinent. When British rule came to an end in 1947, the subcontinent was partitioned along religious lines into two separate countries, India, with a majority of Hindus, and Pakistan, with a majority of Muslims. The eastern portion of Pakistan later split off to form Bangladesh. Many British institutions stayed in place, such as the parliamentary system of government. English continued to be a widely used lingua franca, and India remained within the Commonwealth. Hindi became the official language, and a number of other local languages achieved official status, while a vibrant English language intelligentsia thrived. India remains one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. Apart from its many religions and sects, India is home to innumerable castes and tribes, as well as to more than a dozen major and hundreds of minor linguistic groups from several language families unrelated to one another. Religious minorities, including Muslims, Christians, Sikhs, Buddhists, and Jains, still account for a significant proportion of the population. Collectively, their numbers exceed the populations of all countries except China. Earnest attempts have been made to instill a spirit of nationhood in so varied a population, but tensions between neighboring groups have remained and at times have resulted in outbreaks of violence. Yet social legislation has done much to alleviate the disabilities previously suffered by formerly untouchable castes, tribal populations, women, and other traditionally disadvantaged segments of society. At independence, India was blessed with several leaders of world stature, most notably Mohandas, Mahatma Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, who were able to galvanize the masses at home and bring prestige to India abroad. The country has played an increasing role in global affairs. Contemporary India's increasing physical prosperity and cultural dynamism, despite continued domestic challenges and economic inequality, are seen in its well-developed infrastructure and a highly diversified industrial base, in its pool of scientific and engineering personnel, one of the largest in the world, in the pace of its agricultural expansion, and in its rich and vibrant cultural exports of music, literature, and cinema. Though the country's population remains largely rural, India has three of the most populous and cosmopolitan cities in the world: Mumbai, Bombay, Kolkata, Calcutta, and Delhi. Three other Indian cities, Bengaluru, Bangalore, Chennai, Madras, and Hyderabad, are among the world's fastest growing high technology centers, and most of the world's major information technology and software companies now have offices in India. Contemporary India's increasing physical prosperity and cultural dynamism, despite continued domestic challenges and economic inequality, are seen in its well-developed infrastructure and a highly diversified industrial base, in its pool of scientific and engineering personnel, one of the largest in the world, in the pace of its agricultural expansion, and in its rich and vibrant cultural exports of music, literature, and cinema. Though the country's population remains largely rural, India has three of the most populous and cosmopolitan cities in the world: Mumbai, Bombay, Kolkata, Calcutta, and Delhi. Three other Indian cities, Bengaluru, Bangalore, Chennai, Madras, and Hyderabad, are among the world's fastest growing high technology centers, and most of the world's major information technology and software companies now have offices in India. The land of India, together with Bangladesh and most of Pakistan, forms a well-defined subcontinent, set off from the rest of Asia by the imposing northern mountain rampart of the Himalayas and by adjoining mountain ranges to the west and east. In area, India ranks as the seventh largest country in the world. Much of India's territory lies within a large peninsula, surrounded by the Arabian Sea to the west and the Bay of Bengal to the east. Cape Comorin, the southernmost point of the Indian mainland, marks the dividing line between those two bodies of water. India has two union territories composed entirely of islands, Lakshadweep, in the Arabian Sea, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, which lie between the Bay of Bengal and the Andaman Sea. The effects of the collision and continued subduction are numerous and extremely complicated. An important consequence, however, was the slicing off of crustal rock from the top of the under-thrusting plate. Those slices were thrown back onto the northern edge of the Indian landmass and came to form much of the Himalayan mountain system. The new mountains, together with vast amounts of sediment eroded from them, were so heavy that the Indian-Australian plate just south of the range was forced downward, creating a zone of crustal subsidence. Continued rapid erosion of the Himalayas added to the sediment accumulation, which was subsequently carried by mountain streams to fill the subsidence zone and cause it to sink more. India's present-day relief features have been superimposed on three basic structural units: the Himalayas in the north, the Deccan, Peninsular Plateau region, in the south, and the Indo-Gangetic Plain, lying over the subsidence zone, between the two. Further information on the geology of India is found in the article Asia. It is now generally accepted that India's geographic position, continental outline, and basic geologic structure resulted from a process of plate tectonics, the shifting of enormous, rigid crustal plates over the Earth's underlying layer of molten material. India's landmass, which forms the northwestern portion of the Indian-Australian plate, began to drift slowly northward toward the much larger Eurasian plate several hundred million years ago, after the former broke away from the ancient southern hemispheric supercontinent known as Gondwana, or Gondwanalon. When the two finally collided, approximately 50 million years ago, the northern edge of the Indian-Australian plate was thrust under the Eurasian plate at a low angle. The collision reduced the speed of the oncoming plate, but the under-thrusting, or subduction, of the plate has continued into contemporary times. The Himalayas, from the Sanskrit words Hima, snow, and Ale, abode, the loftiest mountain system in the world, form the northern limit of India. That great, geologically young mountain arc is about 1,550 miles, 2,500 kilometers, long, stretching from the peak of Nanga Parbat, 26,660 feet, 8,126 meters, in the Pakistani-administered portion of the Kashmir region to the Namcha Barwa Peak in the Tibet Autonomous Region of China. Between those extremes, the mountains fall across India, southern Tibet, Nepal, and Bhutan. The width of the system varies between 125 and 250 miles, 200 and 400 kilometers. Because of the continued subduction of the Indian peninsula against the Eurasian plate, the Himalayas, and the associated eastern ranges remain tectonically active. As a result, the mountains are still rising, and earthquakes, often accompanied by landslides, are common. Several since 1900 have been devastating, including one in 1934 in what is now Bihar state that killed more than 10,000 people. In 2001 another tremor, the Bhuj earthquake, farther from the mountains, in Gujarat state, was less powerful but caused extensive damage, taking the lives of more than 20,000 people and leaving more than 500,000 homeless. Still, others, notably the 2005 quake in Pakistani-administered Kashmir and the 2015 Temblor in Nepal, principally affected those regions but also caused widespread damage and hundreds of deaths in adjacent parts of India. The relatively high frequency and wide distribution of earthquakes likewise have generated controversies about the safety and advisability of several hydroelectric and irrigation projects. The southernmost of the three mountain belts is the Outer Himalayas, also called the Sivalik, or Shivalik, range. Crests in the Sivaliks, averaging from 3,000 to 5,000 feet, 900 to 1,500 meters, in elevation, seldom exceeds 6,500 feet, 2,000 meters. The range narrows as it moves east and is hardly discernible beyond the Duars, a plains region in West Bengal state. Interspersed in the Sivaliks are heavily cultivated flat valleys, duns, with a high population density. To the south of the range is the Indo-Gangetic Plain. Weakly indurated, largely deforested, and subject to heavy rain and intense erosion, the Sivaliks provide much of the sediment transported onto the plain. The northernmost great, or higher, Himalayas, in ancient times, the Himadri, with crests generally above 16,000 feet, 4,900 meters, in elevation, are composed of ancient crystalline rocks and old marine sedimentary formations. Between the Great and Lesser Himalayas are several fertile longitudinal vales. In India, the largest is the Vale of Kashmir, an ancient lake basin with an area of about 1,700 square miles, 4,400 square km. The Great Himalayas, ranging from 30 to 45 miles, 50 to 75 kilometers wide, include some of the world's highest peaks. The highest in the range, Mount Everest, at 29,035 feet, 8,850 meters. See researchers note, height of Mount Everest, is on the China-Nepal border, but India also has many lofty peaks. Notable among those is Kanchenjunga, 28,169 feet, 8,586 meters, on the border of Nepal and the state of Sikkim, which is the world's third tallest peak and India's highest point. Other high mountains in India include Nanda Devi, 25,646 feet, 7,817 meters, Kamet, 25,446 feet, 7,755 meters, and Thrissur, 23,359 feet, 7,120, in Uttarakhand. The Great Himalayas lie mostly above the line of perpetual snow and thus contain most of the Himalayan glaciers. The northernmost great, or higher, Himalayas, in ancient times, the Himadri, with crests generally above 16,000 feet, 4,900 meters, in elevation, are composed of ancient crystalline rocks and old marine sedimentary formations. Between the Great and Lesser Himalayas are several fertile longitudinal vales. In India, the largest is the Vale of Kashmir, an ancient lake basin with an area of about 1,700 square miles, 4,400 square km. The Great Himalayas, ranging from 30 to 45 miles, 50 to 75 kilometers wide, include some of the world's highest peaks. The highest in the range, Mount Everest, at 29,035 feet, 8,850 meters. See researchers note, height of Mount Everest, is on the China-Nepal border, but India also has many lofty peaks. Notable among those is Kanchenjunga, 28,169 feet, 8,586 meters, on the border of Nepal and the state of Sikkim, which is the world's third tallest peak and India's highest point. Other high mountains in India include Nanda Devi, 25,646 feet, 7,817 meters, Kamet, 25,446 feet, 7,755 meters, and Thrissur, 23,359 feet, 7,120, in Uttarakhand. The Great Himalayas lie mostly above the line of perpetual snow and thus contain most of the Himalayan glaciers. In general, the various regional ranges and hills run parallel to the Himalayas' main axis. Those are especially prominent in the northwest, where the Zanskar Range and the Ladakh and Karakoram ranges, all in India-administered Kashmir, run to the northeast of the Great Himalayas. Also in the Kashmir region is the Pir Panjal Range, which, extending along the southwest of the Great Himalayas, forms the western and southern flanks of the Vale of Kashmir. At its eastern extremity, the Himalayas give way to a number of smaller ranges running northeast-southwest, including the heavily forested Patkai Range and the Nagar and Mizo Hills, which extend along India's borders with Myanmar and the southeastern panhandle of Bangladesh. Within the Naga Hills, the reedy Logtak Lake, in the Manipur River Valley, is an important feature. Branching off from those hills to the northwest are the Mekir Hills, and to the west are the Jansha, Khasi, and Garo Hills, which run just north of India's border with Bangladesh. Collectively, the latter group is also designated as the Shillong, Meghalaya, Plateau. The second great structural component of India, the Indo-Gangetic Plain, also called the North Indian Plain, lies between the Himalayas and the Deccan. The plain occupies the Himalayan foredeep, formerly a seabed but now filled with river-borne alluvium to depths of up to 6,000 feet, 1,800 meters. The plain stretches from the Pakistani provinces of Sindh and Punjab in the west, where it is watered by the Indus River and its tributaries, eastward to the Brahmaputra River Valley in Assam state. The Ganges, Ganga, river basin, in India, mainly in Uttar Pradesh and Bihar states, forms the central and principal part of the plain. The eastern portion is made up of the combined delta of the Ganges and Brahmaputra rivers, which, though mainly in Bangladesh, also occupies a part of the adjacent Indian state of West Bengal. That deltaic area is characterized by annual flooding attributed to intense monsoon rainfall, an exceedingly gentle gradient, and an enormous discharge that the alluvium-choked rivers cannot contain within their channels. The Indus River Basin, extending west from Delhi, forms the western part of the plain. The Indian portion is mainly in the states of Haryana and Punjab. The overall gradient of the plain is virtually imperceptible, averaging only about 6 inches per mile, 95 mm per kilometer, in the Ganges Basin and slightly more along the Indus and Brahmaputra. Even so, to those who till its soils, there is an important distinction between Bhangar, the slightly elevated, terraced land of older alluvium, and Khadar, the more fertile fresh alluvium on the low-lying floodplain. In general, the ratio of Bhangar areas to those of Khadar increases upstream along all major rivers. An exception to the largely monotonous relief is encountered in the southwestern portion of the plain, where there are gullied badlands centering on the Chambal River. That area has long been famous for harboring violent gangs of criminals called dacoits, who find shelter in its many hidden ravines.